"I'm not clean anymore," cried Virginia. The words cracked like a whip in the dust-heavy room, as if they themselves wished to leave a scar. She sat hunched at the edge of her father's wooden cot, knuckles white around a ragged scrap of cloth. The cowboy, John, though some swore he answered to Jack, pulled the cloth gently from her shoulder and went pale beneath his weathered skin. In the lamplight he saw the bruises, the cuts, the cruel handiwork of bandits who had thought themselves wolves. John said nothing, for his silence carried more weight than pity ever could. His shadow stretched long along the floorboards, as though his very stillness was a kind of shield. Outside, Ash Hollow groaned with the wind. A crooked little town it was, half God-fearing, half whisker-soaked, perched on the prairie like a stubborn nail hammered into bad timber. The folk there believed in two things: gossip and the inevitability of dust. Virginia Mayfield was only 22, but already her eyes looked twice that age. She had come to Ash Hollow with a trunk of books and a will to teach its children letters beyond the Bible. Her laughter had once rung out in the meadow. Now it lodged like glass in her throat. The bandits had taken nothing of her soul, yet the crueler theft awaited her in daylight, her neighbor's eyes. John Calder, cowboy of uncertain past, was known by his quiet rather than his deeds. He wore his hat low, spoke when it mattered, and seemed made of both dusk and patience. Some men feared he carried sin under his skin. Others thought him marked by God's peculiar mercy. Either way, he was alone until that night he saw Virginia's tears soak through her father's ragged cloth. The next morning, word spread swift as prairie fire. Virginia was unclean. Nobody said the bandits' names, for bandits were expected to behave as wolves. It was Virginia the tongues slashed, as if she had invited shame into her own house. At church that Sunday, she reached to shake the preacher's wife's hand, and the woman drew back as though touched by disease. The room held its breath, then exhaled in whispers. Virginia stood trembling, more wounded by that recall than by any outlaw's grip. And it was then John walked forward, slow as the ticking of God's clock, and placed his hand lightly at the small of her back. He said nothing, he never did, but his presence thundered louder than any sermon. Heads turned. Murmurs grew. The girl once gone now had a cowboy standing beside her. The town would never forgive that. That was the spark, the inciting wound that split Virginia's life in two, before John's hand upon her back, and after. Days wore on. Ash Hollow turned its face from her. Mothers forbade their children from visiting the schoolhouse. The mayor ordered the building locked. Men at the saloon spat cruel jokes over whiskey, twisting Virginia's pain into entertainment. And everywhere she went, she felt eyes like nails driven into her skin. But John was there always. He mended her father's fence without a word, left loaves of bread at her stoop before dawn, walked her home down Main Street though folks glared as though escorting a leper. She began to learn his language, the slight tilt of his hat, the way he carried silence like a weapon. Yet silence cut both ways. Her father, Jedediah Boone, a hard man with a Bible carved into his bones, called her a shame upon the family. "You'll leave this town," he hissed one night, "before your disgrace drags us all under." She stared at him through tears she would not let fall. Betrayal from strangers was one thing. Betrayal from blood hollowed her out. That evening she did not return home. Barefoot, she wandered into the prairie night, the stars sharp as broken glass above her. She left her shoes at the edge of the creek, a quiet offering to forgetfulness. If the prairie swallowed her whole, perhaps it would hurt less than staying. John found her there. He did not scold. He did not plead. He sat beside her in the dust, hat in hand, until dawn painted the horizon gold. And when the sun rose, she stood again, not for him, not for the town, but for herself. In that silent companionship, she chose to live. Still, the town would not yield. A gathering was held on the square, where respectable folk declared Virginia must leave for good. She stood before them, trembling but unbroken, while John leaned against a post, eyes narrowed, jaw quiet as iron. Some expected him to draw steel, but he never did. His silence stretched long, so heavy that one by one the townsfolk's voices faltered. Still, no door opened to her. The lowest point came soon after. The schoolhouse, boarded and nailed, loomed like a coffin for her purpose. Children peered from windows as she passed, wanting to learn, forbidden to come near. That night Virginia's spirit cracked. She whispered to John, "Maybe they are right. Maybe I am ruined." Her voice was ash, her body trembling. John did not argue. He only placed in her hand a wildflower, small and stubborn as life itself. She wept then, not for shame, but for the stubborn tenderness of a man who asked for nothing, who believed without words. The turn came quiet as a breeze. One morning, Virginia walked to the schoolhouse with hammer in hand. John followed at her shoulder. She pried off the boards while the town looked on in silence. Dust rose, children gathered, and though mothers screamed for them to return, they stayed. Virginia began to teach right there in the doorway, chalk in hand, her voice steady as a hymn. The children's laughter rang like bells across the prairie. And in that moment, it was the townsfolk who bore shame, not her. Some lowered their heads, others shifted uneasy. The preacher shouted, called her defiled, but even he could not drown the sound of learning and joy. Day by day the children returned, and day by day fewer parents pulled them back. The tide of gossip lost its bite. The whispering knives dulled, and slowly, painfully, Ash Hollow bent. Virginia did not forget. She bore her scars with dignity, no longer as chains but as proof she had survived. John never declared love. Such was not his way. But he stayed. And in the Wild West, staying was the truest vow a man could give. By autumn, the schoolhouse was full once more. Virginia stood in the doorway as the prairie sun spilled over her shoulders. The children's voices filled the air like birdsong, fierce and free. John lingered by the fence, hat in hand. Their eyes met across the dust, speaking volumes neither had need to voice. The old soul in me remembers that day with a strange ache. Not for sorrow, but for the way dignity can rise from ashes, how resilience can bloom in dust. We measure a soul not by what's been taken, but by what still shines after. And so, dear reader, when the world calls you broken, walk on, for even dust remembers the light that lingers.